At this point in the proceedings, I'm going to convince you that you need a second keyboard or a Keytar like this one. This is an Alesis Vortex. It's got no sound, it's a very short keyboard, and of course Keytars belong in the 1980s, so why would you want one? Well, Muse and Pendulum use them, and even Jordan Rudess and Lady Gaga have been seen playing one of these things, so they're back in vogue. Other than that, this one's wireless, so it's really neat. It means I can stand in front of the guitar players and pull faces. But it also sends MIDI messages and MIDI notes that can be used to trigger and change settings on the Kross or any other MIDI equipped synth, so it's rather useful. It also has loads of hands-on knobs, dials, sliders, ribbons and other neat controls that I can use to manually adjust things on the fly on the Kross. And since I can still use pedals linked into the Kross, I can use them as well. I can still play the Kross of its own accord as well. So it's a neat piece of gear. Now the Vortex also sends aftertouch messages which the Korg can react to, but can't generate itself. And this is a really neat effect if you want to imitate growling saxophones and trumpet rips, because it allows you to create some really expressive effects that you can't create on the Kross. Now you don't actually need a Keytar. Another synth or a different MIDI control surface that can send some or all of these MIDI messages will work equally well. But I love my Vortex, and I'm sure you'll want one when you see what it can do. I'm going to start this video by pressing the menu button on the Kross and going into the P pitch page again. When you scroll through the available AMS sources that you can use to control the pitch of a note, apart from the ones we've already discussed and the AMS mixers which I'll look at later, you'll see the following controllers are available. Now these are Poly After, Aftertouch, JSY, M-Wheel and AT2, JSY and AT2, Ribbon, Value Slider 18, Knob Mod 1 17, Knob Mod 2 19, Knob Mod 3 20, Knob Mod 4 21, Knob Mod 1 Plus, Knob Mod 2 Plus, Knob Mod 3 Plus and Knob Mod 4 Plus. In addition, you'll also see MIDI controllers CC83, 85, 86, 87 and 88. Now all of these messages can be sent directly by an external synth and can control the Kross. The Kross will react in different ways to the messages it receives from each of these individual settings. And I'm going to address each of these items in turn, and I'm going to start with the JSY setting. If you remember graphs from school, they have an X and Y axis, and the joystick sends messages that the Kross can receive. So if the joystick is moved along the X axis from side to side rather than up and down, it's sending JS, joystick X messages. If it's moved up and down, it's sending joystick Y messages, hence the JSY setting. Now I don't have a keyboard with a joystick, so I can't show you how that works. But if you have a machine like Yamaha's SY50 or a Roland D50 which does have a joystick, and you set the pitch AMS setting to JSY and the amount to plus 12 on the Kross, moving the joystick will send a MIDI controller message O2, and this will cause the pitch of the note to change by an octave on the Kross. Now the MIDI message sent is controller O2 by the joystick, and this is also breath control. If you've got a MIDI breath controller attached, the pitch will follow that as well. Again, I don't have a breath controller, so I can't show you how this works, but there are plenty of videos on YouTube showing what breath controllers are and what they do. Now a good breath controller isn't cheap. However, if you're into your horns, saxophones and things like that, and you want to create really heavy overblown sounds that really give a good rasp to a saxophone, get one of these. They're absolutely marvellous, but they are, as I say, fairly expensive. The next thing I'm going to be looking at is ribbon control. Now, my Vortex has a ribbon control, And it can be used to produce some really neat guitar style slides between notes. And it's fairly similar to portamento effects, but you've got continuous control over them, which is really, really neat. You don't have a slider on the Kross, so it's 1-0 to the Vortex already. The next AMS control I'm going to use from the Vortex is Aftertouch. It's called Aftertouch because the keys react to pressure and send messages after the original note has been pressed. Now the Korg cannot send, but it can receive these Aftertouch messages and react to them. Now normally if you press a key, once it's down, that's it. If it's velocity sensitive, the faster you depress it, this can have a number of effects on the sound. However, if you have keys sending aftertouch messages, if you press down on the keys and then press hard while they're already down, a further effect can be applied. Now the keys are therefore velocity sensitive and also pressure sensitive. The harder you press, the more pronounced the effect can be. I'm using the expressive brass setting. Now if I press a regular chord, sounds exactly like it does on the Kross. If I press, hold and then press again, it's now pressure sensitive. I've set the P pitch page so that the AMS is aftertouch and the amount is +12. So basically every time I really force down, once the key's already down, I'm going to get that octave boost. So you're getting the difference in velocity, but you're also getting the aftertouch. And I can use that to add filtering effects, LFO effects, after I've already pressed the key down. So you've got enormous potential for creating some really expressive ideas. And you can use aftertouch messages to be sending controls to effects as well as programs. Here I've got a random filter effect applied. Now so I play the brass, normally nothing happens. We've still got that aftertouch applying changes to the pitch, but I've also got it set to control the amount of random filter that's cutting in the effects page. So the more I press down after I've already pressed the keyboard, that pressure will determine the amount of filtering that cuts in as well. In some ways, if you've never had a synth with aftertouch, you won't know what you've been missing, but once you've had it, you'll wonder how you survive without it. Since you can have aftertouch as an AMS source, you can use it to add all sorts of neat effects at the end of a note, such as triggering LFOs, LFO speed, opening and closing filters, and adjusting the amp settings. This allows you to play really expressively, and aftertouch is great on strings and horns. Excuse that. The polyafter setting is slightly different in that it is polyphonic aftertouch. In other words, if you play a chord and you press different notes with different amounts of pressure, each note will provide a different level of aftertouch. If you play a chord with regular aftertouch, the effects of the aftertouch will be the same on all of the notes. Now, the Vortex doesn't send polyphonic aftertouch, so it'll just send through aftertouch messages that you've just heard. So I can't display polyphonic aftertouch. And again, if you want polyphonic aftertouch on a synth, you're going to have to spend quite a bit of money getting it, which is why it's not incorporated as a standard within the Kross. Another alternate modulation source that you can use to control the Kross is value slider. Now the Vortex has a value slider. Don't know whether you can see that, black against black. However, all I've got it doing is sending controller 7 messages. So it's sending volume messages, turning the whole thing up and down. Now I could send panning messages, I could use it to control filter frequencies. Again, alternate modulation sources at work, this time from an external controller. The M-Wheel stroke AT2 setting is an extension of aftertouch. The aftertouch will only cut in where you use the mod wheel, so you have a neat variation. The JSY stroke AT2 does the same thing when you use a joystick or breath controller. So you've got lots and lots of different settings that you can use already. But there are also 8 mod knob settings. The Vortex has 3 knobs, each of which can be assigned to send specific MIDI control messages. Now if you set them up on the Kross, and set the Kross to receive specific messages, you can send them on here and it'll play them back. Now what I've got is a foot controller set to switch the drum machine on and off. I've got knob 1 which will turn the arpeggiator on and off, knob 2 is controlling the filter, and knob 3 is bringing in aftertouch messages which are sending bigger reverb signals and chorus signals than the regular playing will do. So let's have a listen. Foot switch kicks the drums in. That's the filter on knob 2. Can't hear the reverb. Pressing down really hard will bring the reverb in because it's aftertouch being applied. So you've got incredible levels of control with all sorts of knobs and dials that you can push, and I'm still using the controls from the Kross. Now the Kross will allow you to control 4 knobs, but that Vortex only has 3. Certain control surfaces, certain other keyboards that you may want to control the Kross with will have 4, so you've got the option. You've also got the knob plus controls. Basically a normal knob starts at 0 and gets wound up to 10, for example, say a volume controller. But what about a pan control, for example, or the tempo control, where the centre says 0, left, right, or faster, slower, depending on what sort of speed you want the tempo control set. So the plus controls do exactly the same, but they've got this centre détente, as it's called. All that we're left with are the MIDI CC 83, 85, 86 and 87 options. These are what are known as NIR pins, or non-registered parameters. Now the MIDI standard has given numbers to certain controls, as we've seen. Pan will always be number 10 and volume will always be number 7, for example, and the mod wheel will always send CC number 1 messages. However, what if a synth sent a particular message that doesn't fit this standard? And there are new controls being invented all the time. Things like volume and pan are referred to registered parameters because they're part of the MIDI standard, but you can send messages using non-registered parameter numbers, shortened to NIRPin, and get the Korg to react in a particular way. Now the best example of a NIRPin is probably master tuning. Master tuning messages are not included in the MIDI standard, so if you change the tuning on one synth, the rest of the synths that you play and have linked up won't follow. Now, unless you send a message using a NIRPin, using one of the controller's CC, 83, 85, 86 or 87 messages, and tell your synth to react accordingly, you won't get that tie-up. So you've got that option, and there are a lot of other additional controls, NIRPin controls, that you can use. Now the Kross will receive CC 22, 23 and 24 messages, and they will control the gate, velocity and swing settings on the arpeggiator. And I can set the Vortex to send these messages, and also control switch 1 and switch 2 operations by sending 80 and 81 controller messages. So as you can see, you've got enormous control with an external controller, and I've got all these knobs and dials and aftertouch. Now an obvious question is, why can't the Kross send aftertouch? It can receive it, it can react to it. Basically, the extra pressure sensors required in the keys would have put the Kross into a different price bracket, and Korg wanted to keep the price down.